Mr. Watson and Mrs. Watson have a pig named Mercy. Boom! A hole opened under the Watsons' bed. Crack! The Watsons' bed fell into the hole. Mr. Watson woke up. Mrs. Watson woke up. Mercy woke up too. "What the?" said Mr. Watson. "Oink," said Mercy. "It's an earthquake," shouted Mrs. Watson. "It's the end of the world." "Nonsense," said Mr. Watson, but he did not sound very sure. He sounded frightened. Mercy, however, was not frightened. Mercy was hungry. "Don't move," shouted Mr. Watson. "Whatever you do, don't move." Mr. Watson and Mrs. Watson and Mercy all held very still. Mrs. Watson began to cry. "I know exactly what we must do," said Mr. Watson. "We must call the fire department. They will rescue us." "But you said we should not move," said Mrs. Watson. "How can we call the fire department if we cannot move?" While Mr. Watson and Mrs. Watson were arguing, Mercy hopped off the bed. Boom! Crack! "Look," said Mrs. Watson. "Mercy has escaped." "She is going to find help," said Mr. Watson. "She is going to alert the fire department." Mercy left the bedroom at a gallop. She was in a hurry. She was on her way to the kitchen. She was looking for some toast. Boom! Crack! "Help us," Mrs. Watson called. Mercy thought very hard. Where could she get a snack? And the answer came to her. Baby Lincoln always had sugar cookies. Baby Lincoln lived next door. Baby Lincoln liked to share. Mercy took the doorknob in her mouth. She turned it. "Help!" Mrs. Watson called again. Sugar cookies, thought Mercy. The Lincoln sisters lived next door to the Watsons. Eugenia is the older sister. She has many opinions. One of Eugenia's opinions is that pigs should not live in houses. Eugenia often says, "Listen to me closely, baby. Pigs are farm animals. They belong on farms. They do not belong in houses." At the Lincoln sisters' house, Mercy looked into Baby's window. She could see Baby sleeping. Mercy pressed her snout against the window pane. Baby saw Mercy's snout pressed up against the window. "A monster!" shouted Baby. "A monster at my window!" Mercy shook her head. "Sister!" shouted Baby. "Help! Help! A monster!" Eugenia woke up. Eugenia went straight to the phone and called the fire department. "There is a crisis of an uncertain nature at 52 Deckawoo Drive," said Eugenia Lincoln. "Come immediately." "What's going on here?" asked Eugenia. "There's a monster outside," said Baby. She pointed at the window. "That is not a monster," said Eugenia. "That is the pig from next door." "Mercy?" said Baby. Eugenia shook her fist. Mercy stared at Eugenia. Eugenia stared at Mercy. "Pig!" shouted Eugenia. She turned and ran out of Baby's room. Eugenia ran towards Mercy. Mercy's heart beat faster. There was going to be a chase. Mercy loved to chase. She let Eugenia get very close to her. "Oink!" said Mercy, dashing away. "Get out of my yard!" shouted Eugenia. "Oink! Oink!" said Mercy. She ran in circles. She kicked up her heels. "No pigs allowed!" Eugenia shouted. A siren wailed. A fire truck pulled into the Lincoln sisters' driveway. Ned and Lorenzo got out of the truck. "Do you think that's the emergency?" Ned asked. "Could be," said Lorenzo. Ned and Lorenzo sighed. "You never know with this job," said Lorenzo. "You're right," said Ned. "You never know." Baby and Ned and Lorenzo watched Eugenia chasing Mercy through the yard. "What was the emergency exactly?" asked Ned. "I thought I saw a monster at my bedroom window," said Baby. "But it was not a monster. It was Mercy." "Mercy?" said Lorenzo. "The pig," said Baby. "The pig who lives next door." "Help!" shouted a faraway voice. "Help! Help! Help us!" "Did you hear that?" asked Ned. "Somebody is in trouble." "Let's go." Ned and Lorenzo ran towards the call for help. They went into the Watsons' house. "Help!" Ned and Lorenzo looked up. They saw a bed hanging out of the ceiling. They saw Mr. and Mrs. Watson holding onto the bed for dear life. "We're saved!" cried Mrs. Watson. "Of course we're saved," said Mr. Watson. "Mercy has alerted the fire department." "She is amazing," said Mrs. Watson. "She is unbelievable." "She is a porcine wonder," said Mr. Watson.